Hey, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning if you're joining us from out west. Appreciate you taking the time to hop on our webinar today. Another opportunity to learn a little bit more about what's going on in the market and how you can take advantage of some training and sales opportunities here to hopefully boost your sales. This is Kenyon Gleason. I'm the president of NASGW, and as always, Chris and George are joining us to share their insights. The two of these folks are involved in all kinds of things, many of which they can't even talk about. So, but they are very well plugged into the industry, know a lot, and I'm excited to hear from them today. I want to just again let you know I appreciate you being on. It's been kind of a tough market so far this year. NICS numbers, not looking the greatest, obviously, but there are still certain sectors in the market that are doing okay. And, we had a webinar last December, I guess, where we talked about kind of what we were expecting in terms of the market this year. And many thought kind of flat. And that turns out to be, that's about what it is. It's pretty flat. Again, some sectors seeing some positive movement, some going the other direction, and average it all out, we're kind of just hanging in there. So hopefully in your business you're experiencing good things, but if you need to tweak things and increase your sales, today's information should help you with some new and unique ways to do that, and in order to get things started and moving in that direction so you can get to that information, I'm going to turn it over to Chris now, who will run the webinar today. And I'll be in listen-only mode, but if anybody needs me here, by all means, let me know, and we'll be glad to help you in any way we can. Chris, it's all yours.
Kenyon, thanks very, very much. Thanks, NASGW. Thanks, everyone, for attending. Today we're going to talk about how to use customer acquisition and retention surveys to increase sales. 2 points I want to make before we get started. One is that we're going to talk about what I call simplified surveys. There's actually a lot of sophisticated tools out there, like voice of the customer, quality function deployment, journey mapping, a lot of these real formal and sophisticated tools to get you some feedback from your customer. One thing today is going to focus on something that's simple, something that you can maybe start doing in the near term. The other piece of this, and so you know who's listening, we got a mix of OEMs, we got a mix of suppliers, distributors, and others listening here. So when we talk about the customer, there's two customers that we're really going to talk about. I'm going to use that word customer interchangeably. And there's customer and then there's consumer, right? The customer, if you're a supplier to an OEM, your OEM is your supplier. To the extent that that product you make might be also used by a consumer, the end consumer, the user, you might have two customers. So I'm going to use that word customer interchangeably here, but I'd ask you to interpret it based on what your customer base is. Is it an OEM or another supplier or consumer, or maybe all three? If you have questions today, in your box to that right should be a little window to your right, and you can go to where it says questions and type in a question, and we'll try to get it to you at least during the webinar, but if not, we'll catch it at the end. If that box is a pain, there's a little red arrow or red background with an arrow on it to the right. If you click on that, it'll minimize that. With that, let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. The goals. Goals. Let's show you how to collect input and feedback. I'm going to show you how to do it, but also motivate you to do it, to collect it and use it. And so to go through that, we're going to talk about what's the current situation. Kenyon started talking about that. We're going to talk a little about the situation. Why collect customer input? Why don't companies do it? How do you collect it and how do you get started? And again, this is going to be just another tool, ideally in your kit, to improve the performance of your business. So first you get to see my great pick and George's great pick. I'm the good-looking guy at the top. You can read the bio there a little, but what I've done over the years is helped companies get input from their customer on a more formal basis, and then use that to drive profits, to drive revenue, to drive customer service, to drive customer satisfaction. Been working with a client currently right now, actually working on a customer survey for them. And the only other clarification is, you see, I enjoy hunting with Boomer. Boomer's my dog. George, are you there?
I am here. Pretty much what you read there. You know, I've been in this business for a long time. I'm more interested in the technical and the operational use of firearms. That's kind of where I focus my efforts these days. I've been in the training business. I've been in design. I've been in currently, in fact, working with a lot of gun companies, helping them to improve, differentiate their products so that they've got a little better chance in selling in the field. I come as a hunter, a competitive shooter of some elevated level. I write for some of the NRA publications and Concealed Carry magazine, and I'm passionate about firearms. That's the whole thing. My latest venture is really focusing on getting more women into the shooting sports and personal defense and that kind of stuff. And I've established a female firearms instructor scholarship fund with the USCCA, United States Concealed Carry Association, in honor of my late wife, who spent most of her life bringing more women and people in general into the shooting community. So the more shooters we've got, the more people that we've got in using firearms and the associated material, of course, the more customers we have, and it's win-win-win for all of us.
Agreed. And George and I will be lecturing you and sharing insights with you today on how to grow your revenues. And
some of our experiences that we've had some success in.
A bunch. So we work under this umbrella called Growth Strategy Partners. It's a management consulting firm. Our focus is on accelerating the revenue, profit, and organizational growth of the shooting industry companies. You know, we've done some research to identify how do you drive long-term profitable growth. It's these 7 keys you see here on the right. The third one down you see is advanced customer management. This topic today on customer survey, customer input will be part of that customer management piece. And on the bottom, excuse me, you see some of the companies we've worked with in the past. Many people I think listening today have been involved in a podcast or webinar before and heard us, but there's a quick overview. And as George inferred, we're both very passionate about the shooting sports industry, and as much as we can do to help them be successful, we're very happy to do that. Joe, let's talk about the market situation, because everything that a company does should have some relation or connection to the market. Again, going up, going down, tanking, whatever. Why don't you tell us a little about what you're seeing relative to demand and what that means to the companies?
Well, like Kenyon said when we opened this thing up, things are kind of flat, and depends on whose data you look at. You know, demand can be down as much as 12%, or it can be up just a little bit. The latest NSSF look on things was
adjusted NICS survey, right?
Yeah, we were up just a wee bit, nothing outrageous, but so it's kind of in the middle of the plane, so to speak. And what that means is we've got to take looks at ways that we can improve our product, put something new out there, or probably more important than anything else, differentiate what we're already making from the others out there that are comparable to whatever it is that we're making. And it's regardless of whether it's parts or whole product, going to consumers or anywhere else. There's a tremendous amount of duplication. We've gotten used to the duplication over the years simply because sales were almost automatic. And we really didn't have to talk about, well, mine is more precise, or it's got better sights, or we make lighter, further, faster material, whatever. And the other part of it is the just plain lack of innovation. You know, we're making more of the same, and we haven't worked outside the box. And one of the projects that I've been working on for the last couple of years was just introduced at the SHOT Show, and it was a new handgun from a company that had only been making rifles and shotguns. And if you look at the new handgun for what it is, it's incredibly innovative. And two of the things that were important with it is it uses SIG-style sights, which gives a great latitude of what you can put on the gun, either from that company or from SIG or from the aftermarket community. And the thing uses Glock magazines. And I don't know of another company out there that is of any degree of size that uses another company's parts interchangeably with their gun. So you know, that was an innovation that they took a little bit of a chance on, and as anybody can see, that was a good move all the way around.
Well, you're gonna talk about that also a little later, because they used a lot of what we're going to talk about today to get to that input, right?
Exactly. So,
but I think what you're hitting upon is our demand's flat. You know, Kenyon said at the beginning, you know, NICS I think is down overall for the year. Excuse me, adjusted NICS. Differentiation is okay. There's some innovation in pockets, but not, you know, necessarily across the board. And what that does is it impacts profitability, right? And you know, we know that, you know, combination of our clients and companies we've been talking to, you know, things are challenging this year.
Yeah,
no different than last year, right?
Margins are down, sales are down.
So what do you do? I mean, this is kind of the point, though, right? If you're having a hard time, you know, generally speaking, and I'll go back to kind of these 7 keys, you know, companies need to step it up, right? You know, what's the terminology they use of being, is it idiot or something like that, doing the same thing and expecting different results? Or it's not idiot. What's the word?
It's crazy, but
crazy, whatever, right? So
Insanity.
Thanks, Kenyon. There you go. Thank you. Yes.
Well, insanity and crazy are the same. You know, remember, I'm a card-carrying hillbilly, so my vocabulary is not too great.
Funny.
Anyhow, go ahead.
But this drives. I mean, the whole point of this is that, you know, the market's flat, and the companies that are going to be successful, those need to, you know, significantly improve their differentiation, which drives profitability. One way to do that is talk and listen to your customer. Okay, and that's kind of what this is doing. Is as we think about what could be helpful to you, the listener, we think about what's going on in the market, and then what would be helpful, and that's where this, you know, customer survey component comes into play. So
yeah, let me throw this one little tidbit in is you know, sharpen the pencil a little bit. You know, there are lots of when we buy from suppliers as manufacturers, as an example. You know, it's been the same way. You know, we buy this and we buy this and we buy this, and it's been the same price and so on and so forth. You know, well, take a look at what you're actually paying and get competitive with you know, what you actually have invested in your product, whatever that may be. And you know, if you can pay a little bit less for the parts that you get and the quality is as good, that means more profit.
Exactly.
So again, attention to detail here.
And that's the refinement of the management system, you know, and you know, let's talk about, you know, well, why would you want to collect customer input? I mean, I think we all may know, generally speaking, why you would do it, but let's talk about specifics. In fact, I'm even going to share with you a conversation that I have often with the owners or executives as we start talking about customer feedback, and we'll get into this a little later, because we'll talk about, you know, asking your customer specifically why they buy your product or service. And they have that conversation with an owner or executive. They're usually responding to me going, well, Chris, you know, I'm not sure they really understand why they're buying it. And as you peel it back into one of the quantitative methods we look at it, and that's actually kind of the point. Many times as we start this process of trying to understand from a customer's perspective, why do you buy from a supplier? they really don't know. And that's actually hurtful to you, listener, because you don't have any hooks, you don't have any reasoning. And then what happens is you may have a hiccup for some reason, and that starts that flag of, hey, wait, why are we working with these guys again? Oh, we've been doing it for 20 years. Okay, what does that mean? Like, what do they bring value to us? And we had a quality defect, we had a recall, we had whatever, and it starts that impetus of, well, let's go out and get bids. So one of the reasons to do this is to start to create those hooks and help your customer understand the value you're bringing to them. Now, the other thing that always happens is, well, geez, Chris, do we want to raise that issue now? Well, yeah, you do. I mean, are we gonna raise an issue and provoke them to go do something? We've never seen it happen. Every time we work with clients to do the survey, the feedback is, this is awesome, this is great, I understand much better why we're working with you. And what you see on this page is a lot of different reasons. You know, what's the value that you're bringing? Obviously, you know, can you find out what other products or services, you know, they want to offer to you? Can you cross-sell, upsell? How's our quality? I mean, you're trying to get feedback to make your business better, but what it's doing actually is creating hooks into your customer. And we found this to be extremely valuable. In fact, we had one, I'll give you both two stories. One story was a client of ours. We were doing work on the operational side, and we found out they were designing a new 308 rifle. And when I asked one of the owners, you know, well, how do you decide what features functionality go into 308? His response was, well, Chris, I mean, I've been shooting 308 my whole life. I mean, I know 308, so if I like it, then everyone's going to like it. And I can't see people rolling their eyes, but that's basically what happened. And, you know, months later, after they launched it, they had a lot of changes going back and design changes because it really wasn't what the customer wanted. It might have been what he thought was good, but not the customer. That's a very simple example of not taking customer input and how that impacts a product launch. George, there are things here. I mean, you've just brought up an example of a company that has used some formal feedback systems, and they had great successes. Correct?
Yeah. Well, the company didn't have a lot of experience in the handgun world, and they were looking to expand their footprint in the firearms market. You know, they were very good in the rifles and the shotguns, and they wanted to see what was selling the best and the most, and so they did the customer surveys and found out that almost 50%, I think it was 44% of the firearms being sold in today's market were for personal defense, home defense, or smaller handguns. And they then took a look at, okay, so who's making all these things out there? And you know, a lot of the major handgun manufacturers were. So the thinking was, well, you know what? We can engineer something that's as good or better than what they have, they being the other companies, and we can do it at a lower price if we keep our nose to the grindstone and our pencil sharp. And what they introduced was just amazing. And again, they took their time to engineer it, to test it. We worked on it for a long time, and I mean, just fine, minute detail. But instead of introducing it like some companies do, that you know, they let the market kind of proof test it, if you will, whether it's any good, and then they come back and make a million changes. This gun probably won't need a change at all, just simply because they wanted to do it right. And since they were new to handguns, they needed to be able to do it right, and they did. And right now, as of a couple of days ago, they're pretty far behind. I won't tell you how far, but they're pretty far behind. They're working very hard to keep up with the demand.
With the demand right now.
Yeah, they knew it was going to be good, but they didn't think it was going to be this good. So
exceeded their expectations, right? And we'll talk a little about that. I mean, there's an example again of how someone did something formal, and We'll also share, George, we talked about, we've done some work with some large manufacturers, but we've done some work with some smaller companies, that doesn't, quote unquote, have all the budget that people think is needed to make this happen. So I would be hesitant to think that anybody here listening would think you don't need to get this. I think everyone probably agree, yeah, we need to get it. Now the question is, well, how, and how do we do it, and how do we do it affordably? So we're going to talk about that. But first, a message from our sponsors. Now I want to ask a quick survey, which you should see coming up on your screen, which is asking you, how often do you formally survey your customers? And if you would click on, I think there's 4 answers there. So, I do it at least yearly, maybe say every couple of years. And again, this is formally. Rarely do I do it. Might be once every 3, 4, 5 years, or I just never do it, never have done it. Please click that, and you'll ask, and we'll share that with you so you can all see what are people doing relative to surveys. And I can also share with you, we did this a year or so ago, and we can actually share with you the previous example, the previous results.
Yeah, and remember that this is not just the consumer, it's whoever you're selling to. If you're a manufacturer selling to dealers or distributors, or if you're a parts supplier selling to manufacturers or whatever, that's who we're talking about.
So 40, 50. So here's the results. You seeing those up there, George?
I am.
So 15% yearly, so a small percent yearly, some every couple of years, but if you look at the rarely and never, almost 60%, right? Over 60%. Rarely to never survey their customers.
That shows us right there where we need to make some improvements, and we can.
Maybe that's why they're listening to us today, huh? What do you think?
That's a good thing. Well, everybody wants to stay in business. We all like to eat.
Well, let's show them how to do it, right? Wait, we got to, why don't they collect it? Let's talk about why don't people collect it, right? We've got 3.5 answers listed here, right? You don't understand the value of the input. I think, there's some that say, hey, maybe I don't, what am I going to get out of this? We're going to get some feedback, and what are we going to do with it? But I think that's the smallest of them. I think most of them, maybe don't understand how to do it, or the third, and don't have time, resources, or time to collect it. And I'll actually translate that into it's not a priority for the business. And then we have a whole bunch of other reasons why people wouldn't want to do it, right? So I think, though, many here listening are not doing it, and my hope is that they're looking to understand how do you do it, and how do you do it efficiently. Anything you want to add on this slide, George, before I go? Because I think, there's some reasons why, but a lot of it's not a priority, or they don't know how to do it, is what we've seen.
Yeah, well, they don't know how to do it is probably the biggest deal, and there's some simple ways that we can add, and that we'll add to as we go. So let's go ahead and we'll cover those.
And that's what we want to, maybe emphasize today is that, there's firms out there that do just voice of the customer or quality function deployment, some of these real, esoteric, but data-driven and great input, and it, might cost $40,000, $50,000 to do that. We're trying to help share with you some things that we've done, companies have done on their own, and with some guidance that doesn't take a lot of time or a lot of money. So let's talk about what you want to collect and how do you collect it. Let's do before you start collecting. Let's think through this. What are you trying to accomplish? Again, you've got your customer, your consumer. What's the goal? Is this definitely driven at revenue growth, which is what we've been kind of positioning this as today. And if you did that, you might have different questionings, different techniques that you might use to focus on the revenue growth perspective. If it's a customer service or quality improvement, again, different audience, maybe different approach. As you start peeling this back, you start thinking about, well, what segments, or types do we want to survey? So again, OEMs, consumer, customer, suppliers, what are they buying? So is someone that's buying rifles going to give a different answer than someone that's buying pistols or shotguns or wood grips or barrels? we've also found it very, very helpful for you to think through, why do you think they're buying from you? Okay, and what we will share with you a little about some testing we've done to, we found it very, very valuable for you to define your assumptions. Why do you think they're buying from you? In fact, we had one client, actually not in the shooting sports space, they were doing some work with Target, the retail store. And I was having a discussion or debate, I guess, with the head of sales. And I said, well, why does Target buy from you? And he said, well, innovation. We provide them a very innovative product. Now, I knew what the company was, and I know Target, not necessarily known as the innovation company. And I said, really, that's interesting. And then innovation, it's not price or quality or value. I said, nope, it's innovation, Chris. And I said, why don't you go ask Target? He was actually going to have a line review in a few weeks with Target. So why don't you go ask Target, why they buy from you? And he rolled his eyes and said, Chris, that would just be stupid. I'd look stupid if I asked them. I said, well, there's actually ways to do this without, quote unquote, looking stupid. I said, but first, what I'd like you to do is write down, let's say the top 5 reasons why you think Target buys from you. And then I said, and he rolled his eyes, and all right, fine, whatever. And, now I want you to prioritize them. Which one's most important? And he rolled his eyes again, and I said, okay, fine. And I think he was, again, focused on innovation. And so we got to a point where I had this little debate. So I said I'd bet him $50 that, Target would not give him the same answers. And he went to Target, and we kind of armed him with approach and questioning. And he came back and learned that obviously Target was not buying innovation. They had been years ago, but they'd now turned into a value buying process. And that obviously changed how they're selling and made them more successful in selling, because they'd thought through what are they trying to achieve, with whom, and why. So there's a lot of planning that's needed to before you actually just jump into it. Who's going to do the survey? We'll talk a little later about you or third party. Who's going to drive the initiative itself? Because when you get the information back, it's not about getting the survey, it's what are you going to do with it. So here's some things to do before you collect it. In fact, we actually have a little sample. I talked about that prioritization, I call it prioritization matrix, of some reasons why a company would buy from you: quality, cost, delivery. And what we do, suggest you do, is put your scores down. So you'll see here where it says the priority 1 through 6. You don't have to do all of them. And then some weighting, how important. And so you'll see here that cost, price, or competitive pricing is priority number 1 with a 25% weighting. It's getting a little analytical, but it is providing great insight in terms of what you think they're buying. And then when you start comparing that with the customer, consumer, what are they actually telling you? And the learning is what's the disconnect? What were the assumptions, and why did you think differently than they did? So that's the first planning piece. The second piece, now let's talk about what to collect. This, again, let's go back to the goal. If your goal is, customer, OEM, you might have different things to collect: consumer, supplier, current customers, new customers. There's a technique or a tool out there actually called Net Promoter Score, which again is another tool out there, but it does ask the questions: how likely would you recommend our products or services to a friend or colleague? It's supposedly one of the best questions to ask, and you get this Net Promoter Score, something to look up, and we could share that with you later. But you'll see some questions like, well, why do they buy from you? What do they look for in a supplier? How do you rate or score your suppliers? We've had a client where they hadn't done any surveys, and they started surveying their customers, and they asked this question, hey, do you have a scoring? And they said, oh yeah, sure. And we'll share with you how you're doing, which they didn't know because they didn't ask. The wallet question: how much of their wallet do you have? So, if you're supplying, let's say, barrels to a company, how many do we sell? Do you buy 100% of your barrels from us? there's actually some great data from a consumer perspective that, and the SEW has out, Kenyon mentioned it before, their database, where you can find, as an OEM, your market share. So if you're selling the end product, the rifle, pistols, and ammo, you can find out how's your market share currently, but also you can see if it's getting better or worse. That's something from an external data perspective. And some of the questions a little later of, how do you sell them more? Who's their best supplier, and what are they doing that you're not? And there's obviously the demographic questions, because you need to get a sense of, either where they're from, what are they buying, how much are they buying, to help you understand in perspective where they're coming from. George, you want to add anything on this?
I think you're hitting it right on the money. I can ad lib on, but it'll waste time. So go ahead.
Okay, fine. I can't see that. Let's go in and talk about then how do you collect it. This is, so again, a lot of different ways to do it. Top picture is basically showing at a show, right? We got the NRA annual meeting coming up. There's a conference. There's a lot of consumers there. There's one way to get some feedback there. You've got the phone. Obviously, you got the mail concept, and then the whole online piece in the lower left-hand corner there. There's a lot of online tools. We use SurveyMonkey ourselves when we do some of the surveys. And on the right side, you've got other third parties. Southwick is another firm in our industry that does a lot of the more sophisticated, advanced surveying. The third party that could do it. But NSSF has some great research that they do in association with Southwick. Some of the shooting sports, I'm just showing some of the IDPA USPSA, but again, whether it be hunting or others, there's a lot of other third-party data out there that could be very, very helpful to you. And then you got the mix. Sorry?
I was going to say, you've got some of the direct stuff too. If you look at the talk to the president or ask the president, Mike Pfeiffer at Ruger put into place, and Chris Galloy is carrying that on. You've got a direct line, to somebody that will listen, and they find out some pretty good information like that. And I don't know of another organization out there, that has something like that. Now, I have no idea that Mike or Chris actually listen to each and every one. They've got bigger things to do, but I guarantee you somebody's listening. As a matter of fact, I know somebody's listening. And, they compile that data internally. And, they've made some business decisions just because of, popular demand. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the other stuff that they've done, with their customer service folks and how they've used those to get customer feedback, from the real end user, and some of the decisions they've made and products that they put out there.
Someone, George, is actually asking a question. What if you don't have a good list? So I'm assuming that means something like you don't have a good following. I assume everyone has a customer list, right? So that's easy. Now, whether you have contact information, phone numbers, emails, et cetera, that's when you start peeling this back. Again, the company we're working with right now, smaller supplier to an OEM, and they obviously have customer information. But when I ask them, who is the purchasing decision makers for some of their products, that's not necessarily in the customer file, right? Purchasing may have that, so we have to create some stuff offline. It's in their heads. So they have partial information, but we're going to go get and build it. And again, the benefit is not just doing it this first time, but now you have that on an ongoing basis.
Well, the other thing,
one of the things.
Go ahead. NSSF, NASGW all have members, and if you're a member of those organizations, you've got list of all the members, and then you can just simply go right down through and target those that apply that you'd like to approach and get involved with. That expands the list. and obviously the customers that you already are servicing are the list.
Exactly. And we've used this for other clients to start building their following, right? Facebook or Twitter or whatever the case may be. This now starts building better communications with your consumer and your customer. And then, George, we did one for a client a few years ago. They were thinking about introducing a new product into the market. They asked us to drive it, and we used a combination of their customer list, their consumer list, some of their followers, right, groups on their Facebook and Twitter. Mm-hmm. And that was stuff that they actually did it themselves with some guidance from us, but then we went out and did some focus groups. In fact, I think we used one of these websites, one of the social media in the industry to do another survey. And using multiple of those brought some great information to this client in terms of decision what they should do. So
that's the benefit of having somebody on the outside doing something too. They're familiar with who to go to and where to go to, and they are also familiar with how you can get as much work done as you can internally, and then pick up the slack otherwise. So
exactly.
It saves time, money, and effort.
Now, we hit upon a little about who should collect it. Generally speaking, we try to suggest that you, the company, collect it. But, again, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So if you have the expertise, you've got the money or people to do it or pay for third-party surveys and the time, that's great. We're more of an advocate, by the way, of using the phone call. In fact, my I don't know if I call it famous, but the thing I like to suggest the most is called the lunch survey or coffee survey, where you basically take someone out, for a coffee or a lunch. Again, if they're local or maybe it's worth because they're a top 10 supplier or customer that you should go there and just have lunch with them. We did this once and we had rave reviews from the client. But, because you've got the relationships and you can ask some more detailed questions. If you've done an independent survey, then again, doing it yourself. If it gets very technical, maybe these are technical conversations, so that's something you could do unless you get, again, a very technical firm. But again, if you don't, on the right side, if you don't have the expertise, you've got some money available, you don't have the time, and you want a third-party perspective. The client we're working with right now, we're doing a mix. He's asked us to actually do some surveys because he wants an independent perspective. He doesn't want it influenced by them maybe doing something and that the customer not being truthful, because a lot of times people don't want to tell you the truth over the phone. So, autonomy, there's that question of honesty and feedback. Maybe you need a bigger database, so you need to use a third-party firm to do it, or even some market specialization or segmentation. When you get into, this voice of the customer or quality function deployment, there's an expertise there and maybe some segmentation information that you don't have. And again, you can blend the approaches. So think about, if you're going to do this, is this you or a third party or some mix thereof? So what do you ask? Here is what I'll call our simple general survey. Okay, now this is definitely geared towards a supplier asking an OEM or a supplier asking their customer. And, not necessarily this order, but, what are the top reasons you do business with us? How would you rank the importance of these characteristics? Again, these characteristics are what you defined previously and assume it gets validated. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate our overall performance? What could we do to get from the 7, 8, or 9 to a 10? Who's your top supplier and why? How much business? There's your number 5 is that wallet share question. What could we do to provide more services to you? What would you like us to do? And then, number 7 is the net promoter score question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely would you recommend us to a friend or associate? This is something that we've done. We usually have a 10 or 12 question survey, but it's not that deep or voluminous because you're trying to start a conversation and trying to get some initial feedback. And based on what you're trying to accomplish, then these questions get changed or adjusted, but again, it's a conversation. And again, we do this around lunchtime. You have some, preface, how are we doing? Geez, we notice you buy from us a lot. Here's some things that, we like about working with you. And then you get into the survey. And in fact, we actually have the survey written down, so it's a formal process. And people ask the question, wait, you bring a piece of paper to lunch and stuff? I said, well, it's part of the process, and people understand you're trying to get some feedback. But as you start talking about getting feedback, then you start asking about more sales. And so this is how the process turns into not just getting feedback, but increasing sales. We did this exact survey or process with a company, and we actually were helping them build their strategic growth plan, and they thought the way they were going to grow was by selling new products to new customers, because they had this higher priced product, and they thought they'd be easier to sell fewer of the higher priced products than more of the lower priced products. And so we helped them understand what their goal was, to increase the revenue growth and obviously profit growth. And as we analyzed the business, we realized, and they realized, that they actually had a lot of lost sales or opportunities in existing customers. But instead of just going to a customer and saying, hey, can we sell you more stuff? We went through the survey process. We actually had the CEO go meet with some of the customers in lunch and ask them, these questions and a few more. And what they found out was that there was so much opportunity in the existing customer base that they almost stopped new customer prospecting and focused on the existing customer, cross-selling and upselling. And actually their revenue growth increased because of it in a very short time, because they had easy sales. So it's a phenomenal approach. In fact, that CEO called me up once, and right after the first 3 or 4 of them, he said, at Descenso, I figured you out. And I said, that's interesting, because I haven't, so tell me. He says, no, I know why you told us to do these surveys. I said, I do? Why? Well, I thought it was to, get new customers. And he says, no. He says, I have lunch with these people, and I ask them all these questions. They love it, and they go, man, this is really, really good. How'd you decide to do this? And he says, well, I have to tell them that this consultant, Chris Descenso, suggested it. And they go, well, could you give us his name? So, indirectly, we're getting some work on it, which is kind of funny. George, anything you want to add on this before I move on?
Let's move on.
So what does it look like when you're done? Here's a example, actually, from the National Student Sports Foundation, from their, I think it was their general market survey questions. Again, quantitative. What's the reason why you buy a gun? Starts at home defense, back to self-defense, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, some quantitative results. This is something that we got from one of our clients. They were looking at potentially getting into the classic MSR or AR market. Through some focus groups and surveys that we did, they found out that there actually was a market for a modern sporting rifle, MSR, sorry, and a classic one in particular. So again, in the design of this, it wasn't just looking at a new product or a new rifle, but something specifically dealing with modern sporting rifles in the classic design. So there's some outcomes. So now, how do you get started? The simple piece. This is the easy piece. How do you get started in doing this? I see a few questions. By the way, I'll just mention again, if you have any questions along the way, add that. There's a little question box there. We've got a few we can get to, but if you have others, please get to us, and we'll try to answer them before we're done. How do you get started? So we're a big fan, as we talked earlier, about starting small and starting simple. The thought is to pick an area that you might be able to get some simple feedback from, and act on it, and then get larger. So customer service. You have people answering phones potentially right now, dealing with your customers. Can you do a simple survey with them? 3 questions.
Yeah. Let me weigh in on that a little bit.
Go ahead. Yep.
I work for a large company for a bit, doing some training and education for their internal people, and I trained their whole customer service group. It was a little over 40 people, and the key to that whole thing was to get them familiar with their own products, because a lot of them hadn't even shot their own products, and the understanding of how they worked, and the fact that they could say when a customer called in, yes, I have used this product and I'm familiar with it, or maybe I own it, or whatever, gave them quite a bit of credibility right off the bat. The second part of that is to learn how to use the owner's manual. In other words, if they called in about a particular rifle, reach up, grab the owner's manual, and know that if you go to page 42, that's where it tells you to adjust the sights and direct the customer to that. What that does is it builds a relationship with the customer, and it develops some credibility, if you will. And while you got them on the phone, and this was the key thing that's relevant to what we're talking about here, is ask them a few key questions. And these questions would change from time to time depending on what the manager of the unit wanted to know and what the company wanted to know. But it would be, it could be something just as simple as, so why did you buy our product? And what did you like most or least about the product? Are you interested, or would you buy another of our products? Or would you recommend us to a friend? Is there anything you'd like to see us make? And it was limited to 3 questions. And, while you got the consumer on the phone, it doesn't make any difference really, who it is. They can give you some valuable input. You compile that, and you find out some interesting things sometimes that you had no idea that, that was in demand. Therefore, you can get more people involved with it. So, a little internal education with the customer service people. While you've got them on the phone, while you've got your customer on the phone, why not spend another 30 seconds to 45 seconds, or maybe even a minute, just to get some free information? Easy day.
And that's why we listed at the top, because most of us all have some 1 or 2 or 10, pick a number, customer service representatives, and it's a great, simple way to get started and to break into it. Your salespeople can start doing this as they're making sales calls. Again, a little segment that's simple. Obviously online, something simple like the Twitter or Facebook or whatever, to get some feedback. We can get into the fact that you probably need to offer some reward or prize for doing it. I don't know about you, but I get surveys, 10 of them so whatever every week, and I just hit delete because we don't have time for it. But if they offer me something, then I might do it. But the thing we're hitting upon here, and the easy, is the NRA annual meeting coming up that many of you may be going to and or having a booth at. And I can see people rolling their eyes going, Chris, that's like 2 weeks away. I said, yes, of course it is, but let's do something simple. Can you put a quick survey on SurveyMonkey, put it on an iPad or 2, and as people are walking through the booth, ask them to, come over, could you fill out a 3-question survey? You'll get, we're giving away X number of shirts or hats, or 1 firearm, 1 product, and asking them, what products, which of our products do you own, so you know where they're coming from. This is a demographic question. And then what are the 3 reasons you like our product? And then the Net Promoter Score, a 1 to 10 scale. If you are technically challenged, a piece of paper always works. And maybe you give them, and that puts them in the raffle to win something. It's definitely might be a ready, fire, aim approach, but it's coming up. If you're at NRA, you're going to have, for a lot of people going through the booth, this would be a great time to start something simple. This is just we thought we'd put a list of how to put this together, 7 steps between planning it and implementing it. I think the highlight here is number 5. When you do the study, we do it in a 2-step process. We start with what we'll define as your B customers, not your A, your top customers, but maybe your Bs or Cs. So we're not going to launch this thing out completely all at once. We're going to do a pilot with a small group with your B or C customers, get some feedback from them, and then we actually make some adjustments to the survey as we're doing that. And then the last piece here, so summarize. Did I miss something here? No.
Well, one thing that I did want to bring in and add to that is when you're doing your customer surveys, bring somebody in from the outside that's familiar with the area that you're working on. And again, as an example, I'm intimately familiar with concealed carry and small handguns and the design of these handguns and how they should be made and finished and all this other kind of good stuff. And this company was smart enough to call me in and say, this is what we think we want to do. What do you think? And they got my opinion. And then they went back and revised the product and called me back in again. And over several different iterations, I brought to them as a user and what a customer would like to see, things that they really hadn't thought about, hadn't recognized. And I'll throw one other little tidbit in is from an engineering standpoint, one of the large companies I worked with literally was brought in to train the engineers how to use the products that they made. And it's important that the decision makers, whether it's the engineers, the product managers, the salespeople, or anybody else, very important that they understand how the guns are going to be used. And it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, the guy with the 308 that said, well, if I like it, everybody else will like it. Well,
right. Classic.
That is classic. that is classic, and the customer drives the show. They're the ones that spend the money. They're the ones that buy your product. So it's so important to get customer feedback. But even above that, it's so important to get somebody that is familiar with that particular area of expertise. It could be long-range shooting. It could be, whatever. Get an expert in there that, has some track record and some experience to give guidance to the direction you want to go.
Well, it's about bringing in experts, right? I mean, we'll talk about this actually in a second here, right? Because, if you think about it, here's a summary, right? We all agree there's a need to improve our business performance. We're always trying to get better. Demand is flat. And we collectively, as owners need to step up what we do, get more sophisticated in how we do it. This is one way to do it is surveying your customers, okay? To not only retain them, because you'll identify where there may be some holes or cracks in the armor, but also how do you increase it? But to do that, you need to put a plan together, right? That it's really not that hard, but it might need some expertise depending upon how you want to do it. And you must be willing to listen and adapt. So, and usually, George, right, we know people listening to the webinar are those that want to learn and want to get better. And so kind of where it leaves, them is, so what do you do about it, right? What's your decision? Do you continue to do what you're doing, which is the 60% that are not doing the surveys, or those maybe that doing it semi-regularly, do it a little more regularly? That's to continue what you're doing, or refocus and reevaluate. All right, we need to do this. We need to make it a priority, and therefore we're going to go do it, or we need help, right? I mean, there's effectively three options on this. Mm-hmm. In fact, I'm going to ask one more question before we wrap up completely here, which is, what's going to be your challenge in implementing a customer survey process? So if you take a vote here, I don't know how to do it, but it's not a priority. We're talking about, the voting being, I don't have time or money, but that really comes down to being a priority. We don't have the money to pay for others to do it, or we're pretty good. So if you would vote, you get some feedback to what others are having as a challenge. So we're hearing 60% of them don't do it regularly enough. The question is why? What is the challenge that you're having, or you think you're going to have implementing a survey process like this? And I've got almost 70% responding, so I'll wait another 3 seconds, and then
make a decision. Hit one.
Okay.
Close
So here we
your eyes
go.
for the
We'll
dart
close.
of
Why
truth.
aren't they? Well, here's what's interesting. Well, I'm going to have to compare these to the previous example, because it's showing that 50% actually have a current process. So those are probably the ones that are doing earlier. We'd probably got a little less voting percentage-wise here. 30% saying it's just not a priority, and that's usually an issue, right? And the question might be, how can you make it a priority? Because it should be. You know, this shouldn't be something that you decide to do when you have time. It should be something you do because you're going to get a better business performance out of it. Some of them don't have money. Some don't really know how to do it. So let me close this and back to presentation. George, we've got, where's my time here? 3 or 4 minutes left.
One of the things I wanted to say about customer surveys and bringing in consultants and all that kind of good stuff, you want validation. You know, a lot of people, you know, you're spending some money and you certainly don't want to just throw your money out the window going down the road. So, you know, validation helps a whole lot. So if you do your customer survey first, let's say, and then you have somebody that understands the industry and that particular segment of it, let them come in and tell you the how, what, and why. You know, how does this work? Why is this important to, you know, the consumer? And you know, what is the product that we're going to put out, and maybe even how can we improve it even further to add a little bit of detail to enticing whoever the consumer is to buy this thing.
Exactly.
Validation.
And now you're into
really
that
important.
consumer versus customer, right? So someone was asking here earlier, how do you incentivize customers to respond? We have problems getting responses back. And again, so now we're getting into customer versus consumer. When we do this, or we suggest this from the customer perspective, we're suggesting phone calls for the top tier. So you do your A, you know, customers, and actually some of the B's may be a direct phone call. So that's you're asking for help. One of the things that is known out there, if you ask for help, you'll get more likely feedback for that.
Let me throw this out too. A lot of things, a lot of these customer surveys that I get, as an example, you know, they're going to take 15 or 20 minutes or whatever. I don't have time to mess with something like that. If somebody sends me 3 questions, or even 5, 5's about my threshold. You know, why do you like this, or why did you buy from us, or whatever. You know, I'll take the time to give them that little bit of 3 to 5 questions. But when it gets past that, you know, it's a delete. I don't have time to mess with it. So it's very important when you put together a customer survey that you keep it short and to the point. The other part of it is with the customer service folks. You know, when you've already got your people on the phone, generally 3 is the magic number. Would you mind answering 3 quick questions for me? Well, of course not. You know, 3, it's okay. You know, if we get into 15 or whatever, you know, no, I ain't got time to do that. You know, so keep it short to the point. And
short is a key, right? And then from an incentives perspective, though, one thing we've found eye-opening is that you start measuring the lifetime value of that customer or consumer, and what that person is worth. It indicates you can actually spend a lot more money on your incentive package to get them to reply. So I think the ones that we've seen that have been very successful is when you're doing it on a recurring basis and on every week or every day, so you may give out something. Because people are all doing the, well, geez, what's my chances of winning, right? Obviously, to put out, you know, a $500 product as a raffle, you know, would somebody take 5 minutes to do that? So I guess to answer this question here, I'd ask, what incentives are you providing, if at all? And if you're not, then start doing some, and then you can start raising them up to get more responses. So, you know, we found that paraphernalia, shirts is great in our industry, or a discount on a product, or a free product raffle. We tend to do some testing with it to see what works best, but you got to put an incentive out there, because like George said, we're all getting pounded on this thing. We don't want to hear it. So, George, we're at time. We're at 2 o'clock, or 2 o'clock Eastern. We have other questions that I will answer directly. But if you have more questions down the road, give either of us a call, shoot us an email. Be happy to help you understand how to do this correctly. I'd like to thank NASCW and Kenyon for helping us put this on. And then for those listening, you came here to learn something. I hope you go do something different than what you did before you came in here.
Yeah, and
so
contact us if you think we've got something to offer for you. Contact us. We'll have a discussion, and if we can help, we'll be glad to. And if we can't, we may be able to refer you to somebody that can. So
exactly.
We're all in this together.
So everybody have a great day, have a great weekend, and take care.
Thanks for attending.
Bye.